Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said under a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, the International Committee of the Red Cross will visit hostages not being released from Gaza to provide them with any medication they need. However, neither the Red Cross nor Hamas have confirmed that this will happen. Talks continue between Israel and Hamas, with Israel's national security advisor saying that a hostage release has been delayed until Friday morning. Under the deal, Hamas will release 50 hostages over a 4-day period, while Israel will release some Palestinian prisoners in exchange. Joining us now to better understand the hostage negotiation and exchange deal is Gershon Baskin, the hostage negotiator who negotiated with Hamas to secure the release of soldier Gilad Shalit in 2011. Mr. Baskin, thank you very much for joining us on Forum Daily.
Welcome.
Based on your experience here, what do you make of the deal, and how does it compare to the release of Shalit in 2011?
First of all, the deal that was already negotiated and will begin to be implemented on Friday morning is a no-brainer. It was a deal that everyone had to accept. It's the aim of getting out the women and the children, hostages from Gaza, in exchange for a limited number of Palestinian prisoners who are women and teenagers. The dangers to Israel are always there with a prisoner release, but these prisoners are all from the West Bank, not from Gaza. There are very few actual Hamas members amongst them. There are only a handful of them who have committed crimes that would be considered dangerous. None of them have murdered Israelis, although several of them tried and didn't succeed, thank God. But they can be watched wherever they'll be left to in East Jerusalem or in the West Bank. Israel needs to get all the women, children, elderly, wounded, and sick hostages out of Gaza as soon as possible. They've already been there for 47 days, and that's 47 days too long. So if we can negotiate a deal through the Qataris and through the Egyptians to bring these people home, it had to be done, and it was done. And hopefully, once it begins tomorrow morning, it'll go for 4 days and maybe extend longer to enable us to get all the civilian hostages out.
You've noted publicly that you've been in contact with Hamas for more than 15 years now. How has their position at the negotiating table changed since the early days of the war?
Their negotiating style is the same as it's been right from the very beginning. They set the price that they want. They're the ones who put the deal on the table. And the Israelis are very passive in these negotiations, very unlike Israel in almost every other field of life, where Israelis are very proactive. Here, Israel responds. They say yes or they say no, and they try to get a better deal. But even in the negotiations for Gilad Shalit, the deal was put on the table 6 months after he was abducted. It took 5 years before basically Israeli agreed to those terms. The negotiations that I was involved in was shaping the conditions of the release of the various people, the categories, the terms of their release, etc. But the deal was on the table. It was set. The price was set. Here, likewise, Hamas decided that they would release 50 hostages. I think President Biden helped to actually up the number. It was probably less than that before. The ceasefire is 4 days. Hamas wanted 5 days. Israel was managed through President Biden to get it down to 4 days. There's a possibility, and this is Israel's initiative, of extending it to day 5, 6, 7, 8, where 10 hostages would be released each day. The equation is 1 hostage for 3 Palestinian prisoners. That's a lot better than the Shalit deal. But Hamas basically wants to get rid of these hostages. They're a burden, and they want to keep the soldiers as hostages. And for them, they will make the hard bargain of trying to free all the prisoners in Israel, 7,200 prisoners.
And on the other side of this equation, there are reports that a potential deal was possible weeks ago, but that the Israeli government declined it. What do you make of those reports, and how has Israel's position changed? We have about a minute before the break.
It takes time for these deals to shape their form and to be acceptable. Israel rejected it because they didn't want to do a ceasefire. This deal requires a ceasefire. Israel is in the midst of its war effort. It didn't want to stop its war effort in order to have this deal made. Now they're ready for a break.
When we return, I want to discuss and dig into some of the internal workings of the war cabinet and the response in Israel to the deal. We had a journalist just yesterday say that some members of the war cabinet did not approve of the deal that is about to go through. And we're back with Gershon Baskin. Mr. Baskin, we spoke yesterday with a journalist in Israel who said some members of the war cabinet didn't approve of the deal, given Israel's military advances, and that they argued that Israel should have waited longer to strengthen their negotiating position. What do you make of that claim and that argument?
Look, last night or the night before, it went through three levels of the Israeli government, the war cabinet, which actually has no statutory legal existence in Israel. It went to the security cabinet, and then it went to the wider government. In the wider government, the party of Itamar Ben-Gvir, the extremist right-wing party of the government, they opposed it. All the other members of the government supported it. There may have been individuals, but the parties in the coalition supported it. I think there was an understanding that this deal had to be done. We got to get the hostages out. Those who opposed it said we shouldn't make any deal with Hamas. We should never agree with them. We should never release prisoners. And that's just not going to fly when we have 137 hostages held by Hamas, the majority of them women, children, elderly people, wounded and sick. They have to be brought home. There's no way of getting them home without a negotiated agreement with Hamas.
On that negotiation front, on one hand, we have Hamas, who have said that they will carry out another October 7th again and again, while at the same time, Israel's military goal is to destroy Hamas. What does it take to get two sides who essentially want to kill each other to the table to negotiate?
Now, you described it very well. That's exactly the situation. What it takes is that both sides have interests that go beyond their desire to mutually annihilate the other. And the interest here is, on the one side, Israel getting its hostages out. On the other side, I believe their primary objective of the leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, is to free Palestinian prisoners. So there's an interest here where there's a meeting point, at least at this time, with the small price that Israel is paying, is releasing 150 prisoners, not 7,200, and it's getting back 50 hostages now. They're willing to release more prisoners in exchange for more hostages, again, at the 1-to-3 equation. And that, for the time being, is acceptable to the majority members of the Israeli government.
I want to talk about your relationship specifically with some of the individuals within Hamas. You've been quoted saying you've spoken to Ghazi Hamad, a spokesperson for Hamas, well over 1,000 times over the years.
Right.
What insight can you give us into the mindset of Hamas leadership right now?
Yeah, the Hamas that I knew, Ghazi Hamad, who I've known for 17 years and spoke to him quite frequently over those 17 years, is a different person today than the person that I knew. October 7th was a breaking point where he went from initially denying that they did the atrocious things that they did in Israel, to now not only legitimizing it, but saying, as you mentioned, that they would do it over and over again. So these are very different people. They changed to the extreme after they did what they did in October 7th, and they are no longer, in my mind, even legitimate leaders of this people in Gaza. They have brought the Palestinian people back 75 years. They are greatly responsible for the damage that has brought on the Palestinian people. Of course, Israel did the bombing, but they pushed the lever that pushed Israel to do this, and they have to take responsibility. And I hope that the Palestinian people, when they wake up from this nightmare catastrophe, that they will put the blame where it deserves to be put, on their own leaders.
And in regards to the political factions at work here, we know another factor here is the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They also have hostages. One of them was announced dead just this week. To your knowledge, are they involved in this negotiation, or is that an entirely separate conversation for the Israeli government?
They are involved in the negotiations.
Okay.
One of the Hamas leaders in Doha has spent time with the head of the Islamic Jihad, who's based in Tehran and in Syria, and they've communicated. But Hamas is in charge of all the hostages in Gaza. Maybe they weren't in the first days of the war, the first weeks of the war. After 6 weeks of the war, Hamas is fully in control of all the hostages, even if they're not in possession of all of them. They are the ones who make the decisions here. They're very centralistic. They're very militaristic. They use their power even against their rivals from within the Palestinian territories and Gaza in particular.
Well, Mr. Baskin, I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us today. tremendous insight. And as this situation unfolds, and as hopefully more hostages are released back to Israel, we can have you back on to continue to break down how the deal proceeds. So thank you very much.
Thank you.